Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 26th of March of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And this video we're going to talk first of all about the deal of the century that was signed by the Russians today. Basically it's not just one deal, basically there are two deals that were signed by the Russians. The first deal is about the ceasefire on the energy facilities, and the second deal that was signed by the Russians is the deal on the ceasefire on the Black Sea. So the Russians, as I understand, I've read the documents that were published by the Russians, by the Americans and by the Ukrainians, and I came to the conclusion that the Russians most likely signed the most favorable deal ever since the beginning of probably the collapse of the Soviet Union. Let's discuss this in details. Let's talk about the benefits, and let's talk about the pluses and assets or benefits that Ukrainians managed to get as a result of this deal. The Ukrainians basically haven't got a lot. They haven't got much, just several things they managed to get from this situation. And first and probably the only thing is that according to this deal between the Ukrainians and the United States of America, not between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, Russia is obliged not to move warship beyond the eastern part of the Black Sea, since violation of this point will be considered as a threat to Ukraine's security and grounds for exercising the right to self-defense. What the Ukrainians are trying to tell us? First of all, currently the Russian fleet is located, mainly the Russian fleet is located along the southern part of the Russian Federation or the eastern bank of the Black Sea. So there are lots of ships, lots of different types of submarines, just vessels, just cruise missiles, carriers or something like this. And the Ukrainians are saying that if any Russian ship cross the eastern, let's say, border, and telling the truth is very difficult to understand what does it mean, the eastern part of the Black Sea. Anyway, we believe that there are three parts, western, central and the eastern part, and the Ukrainians are saying if the Russians enter the central part or the western part of the Black Sea, then the Ukrainians will have the right to attack these ships with the missiles. So it's just something like the constitutional fact. Ukrainians had this right in the past, nothing changed, the only just saying that if you do this we will attack you. You would attack them in any case, so it's not even something that Ukrainians managed to get as something like a benefit as a result of this deal. So this is probably one of the points from the Ukrainian side, one of the most important benefits. And the second one is that according to this deal, the United States of America will help the Ukrainians to return back the prisoners of war. The United States will support the exchange of prisoners, the release of civilians, and the return of Ukrainian children. So, but this is also another process that is ongoing. The Russians always return the Ukrainians the prisoners of war. The only difference in this is that Ukrainians and the Russians usually change their prisoners like for the same number of soldiers. So the Ukrainians return, let's say, 200, and the Russians, let's say, return 200. But the problem is that the ratio of the prisoners of war is currently not in Ukraine's favor. I can't tell you the exact numbers, but let's assume that, for example, the Ukrainians have just 5,000 of prisoners of war, and the Russians have 25,000. So, of course, for the Ukrainians, it is very important not just to return like 10 soldiers for 10 soldiers, one Ukrainian soldier for one Russian soldier. For them, it is much more better to return everybody for everybody, all for all, or at least to have some ratio. And that's why they're asking the United States of America to be in the middle of this process and to help the Ukrainians to return as fast as possible all their Ukrainian soldiers back on the territory of Ukraine. So probably that's it. These are the only benefits that Ukrainians managed to get as a result of this deal. Of course, we're talking about the ceasefire on the energy facilities. Of course, we are talking about some possibilities Ukrainians will be able to trade with their products with the world, but I'm not sure that this is just a regular situation, you know. There is nothing that we can say that this will improve or increase the strength of Ukraine and the armed force of Ukraine. But when talking about the Russians, here we can see completely different picture and completely different story. Let's discuss them in detail. details. First of all, of course, the Russians will also receive access to the Black Sea. They will be able to trade. This is very important. And the United States of America promised the Russians that Ukrainians will never use vessels, will never use commercial vessels for military purposes. And this is one of the most important benefits for the Russians, because the Ukrainians, since the beginning of the special military operation, used a lot of vessels as a carriers for missiles, as a carriers for drones that then Ukrainians used to attack Crimea, to attack, let's say, Novorossiysk and many other Russian regions. And now the Ukrainians will not be able to do this. Obviously, this is a very important benefit for the Russians. Another important thing is that the Russians, according to this deal, not the Russians, that the United States of America, according to this deal, must lift the sanctions. Just take a look at this official statement of Kremlin. There are several paragraphs here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, and these paragraphs tell us that before the beginning of the ceasefire on the Black Sea, the United States of America must do 5 things. And I would like to point your attention that every single point starts with the lifting, the removal, removal. So every single statement means that the United States of America, first of all, must remove something, must lift something from the Russians. Let's discuss in details. The lifting of sanctions from Rossельхозbank and other financial institutions involved in the ensuring operations on international trade in food and fertilizers, their connection to SWIFT. So the Russians are saying that if you want this deal to be signed, you need to connect the Russians to SWIFT, and obviously this is very important benefit. Another important thing, removal of restriction on trade finance transactions. Once again, SWIFT and many other finance different tools that the Russians may use. Removal of sanctions from companies producing and exporting food. Removal of restrictions on servicing ships in ports and sanction from ships under the Russian flag involved in the trade of food. This is very important because in this case, for example, the European countries will not be able to arrest the Russian ships in the Baltic Sea, because during the previous months we got lots of cases when Germany, Finland, Norway were arrested different ships that were moving from Russia. Basically, those ships were Russian ships, but they were moving under another flag. So that's why they arrested them without any consequences. Removal of restriction on the supply of agricultural machinery to the Russian Federation, as well as other goods involved in the production of food and fertilizers. So what does this deal mean? And both these deals means for the Russians. The most important thing is that this deal doesn't tell the Russians, doesn't force the Russians to stop the special military operation, or to stop the war, or to stop the Russian offensive operation. This deal doesn't mean anything like this. If you want to continue war, this deal tells the Russians you can do whatever you like. The only thing you must do, not to attack the energy facilities and not to use ships for military purposes, and that's it. So basically, these deals, first of all, means the following: the Russians will be able to continue the special military operation, but without sanctions, with a lot of money, a lot of resources, and very good relations with the United States of America. So basically, everything will be the same for the Russians, just with one very important exception: the Russians will have no sanctions from the United States of America. Telling the truth, this is the perfect situation for the Russians to start advancing significantly and along the entire line of combat contact, or whatever they like and whatever they want. Obviously, the deal of the century was signed by the Russians, and telling the truth, Zelensky and Ukraine can't do anything with this. Of course, they will try to ruin this negotiation process. They will try to ruin this peace agreement, this ceasefire, and they have lots of tools how to do this. First of all, we discussed this in the previous video, that for both sides, for the Russians and for the Ukrainians, the ceasefire on the energy facilities ends in different times. The Russian ceasefire ends on the 17th of April, the Ukrainian ceasefire ends on the 25th of April, and most likely Zelensky will use the situation to blame the Russians in falling down the entire process, and then they will break and quit this entire negotiation, this talks process, and everything will start from the beginning. Lots of ways for the Ukrainians how to do this, because if the situation continues developing exactly as it is written in the documents provided by the Russians, by the Ukrainians and the United States of America, then in 3-4 months the situation for Ukraine will be much more difficult and much worse in comparison with current one. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, because we have lots of very important updates. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the Sumy region. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were advancing along the entire border, along the entire line of combat contact that goes along the border. The Russians were attacking the village of Volodymyrovka, the village of Vodolahi. The Russians were entering the village of Veseliya. The Russians were improving their positions further in the southern direction from the village of Basovka. The Russians were attacking the checkpoint on the border. We still haven't received any proofs that can confirm the Russian control over this territory, but at the same time we don't have even a single video that can confirm the presence of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of this construction. The Russians continue publishing lots of videos with trophies. Here we can see Abrams completely undamaged that was captured by the Russians, and many other different tools, weapons and equipments and arms were captured by the Russians. And of course the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions in the direction of the settlement of Oleshnya. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were attacking the Russians in this forest, which confirms Russian control over this territory. The video was published once again by the Russians, by the Ukrainian side. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates about the situation in the village of Guiva, and most likely, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians show fierce resistance, and the Ukrainians are not planning to fall back from this territory. We don't know for sure why exactly the Ukrainians are not falling back. Maybe they basically can't do this because the main roads under complete Russian FPV or artillery fire control. But maybe some other reason, we don't know. Anyway, the source reported that the Russians continue concentrating of their forces around the village itself, and most likely in the very near future we should expect another decisive offensive operation from the Russian side. As for the Belgorod direction, we continue receiving reports from both the Russians and the Ukrainians about clashes, very heavy clashes in this area, and both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, show us completely different picture. The Russians are saying that they're about to finish the clearing operation in the village of Demidovka and the village of Popovka, and in these fields and forests, let's say between these two villages and settlements, the Ukrainians on their side tell us completely different picture. The Ukrainians are saying that they managed to dig in deeper, that they managed to concentrate forces, that they managed to bring additional forces and resources, and that everything according to plan and according to Ukrainian schedules. So it's very difficult to understand what is happening, but one thing we can say for sure, that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians yet have raised their flags on the territory of both settlements. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern and central Kupiansk direction, where the Russians continue offensive operation. One thing we can say for sure, that the Russians are intensifying their activities in the area of the possible general battle. Now the Russians, we see that they every single day are advancing more and more and further in the direction of the city of Liman and in the direction of the city of Slaviansk. In this video we can see the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions in Tarskoye. We expect maybe even attempts of assault operation in this area as well. Furthermore, the Russians are finishing the clearing of the Serebryanka forest. In this video we can see how the Russians were pummeling and burning out the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine already in the most southern part of the Serebryanka forest, with the tall flamethrower systems dealing significant damage to those Ukrainians that were located in this area. Another important video was made almost along the Seversky Donetsk river itself. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians began or started clearing operation of Ukrainian camps and bases along the bank of the river. So we see that the Russians are about to finish the battle for this forest, and then they will start probably offensive operations towards the city of Seversk. It's not very easy thing to cross the river of Seversky Donetsk, but since the beginning of 2022, the Russians made lots of attempts. Maybe they have a lots of experience right now with this. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, we haven't received anything. There are very heavy clashes. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians published lots of videos, how they were attacking each other, how they were trying to clear the situation, but as you can see, without any changes on the ground. As for the city of Toretsk, telling the truth, the situation here is very difficult. Another day brought us additional changes, additional counterattacks, and additional videos. For example, today the Russian sources, the Ukrainian sources published the video how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians with FPV drones that were moving along this road. The Russians were moving along 0524 road in the direction of the settlement by the name of Sherbinovka. So they were attacking like here, trying to, let's say, cut, maybe to take this territory under complete control. And based on this video, we have adjusted the map. But the only problem with this video is that this video was made when there was still snow, so it's very difficult to understand the relevant situation and when exactly this video was made. Maybe this video was made long time ago, even before Ukraine counterattacks, but this video was published just today by the Ukrainians, and several days ago there was a snow there, so maybe this is a fresh video. Very difficult to say. The Russian sources reported that this video was made somewhere on the 25th, on the 24th of March of 2025. Anyway, we have adjusted the map, and from this perspective, from this attack, we can make a conclusion that the Russians were trying to get there with the purpose to cut the settlement of Sherbinovka from the north. If the Russians managed to enter this territory, then the Russians would be able to cut the Ukrainians that are currently located on the territory of these villages and settlements in Cauldron, and this attack of the armed forces of the Russian Federation would force the Ukrainians to begin retreat process in the western direction through the water reservoirs and the fields. So the Russians were trying to cut the Ukrainians on Cauldron, but as for now we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to complete this offensive operation or not. At the same time, the Russians were bombing the northern part, the northern roads in the vicinity of Klibanbyk, with the purpose probably not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional reinforcements to unblock the Ukrainians that were cut by the Russians. Clashes continue in the area of the Zabalka micro district. We have lots of geolocations that confirm the Russians improved their positions to the south of the coal mine by the name of Centralnaya. But on the other side, we got a video published by the Ukrainian side how they were counterattacking the Russians. In the northern part, we will not watch this video because there are lots of episodes of violence, and Ukrainians counterattack, and it seems that's on the 25th of March, the Ukrainians managed once again to restore control over at least this part of the mine. So we are waiting for additional proofs, we are waiting for additional geolocations that can allow us to be 100% sure that this is fresh video, and if it's true, then we will have to once again adjust the map in the northern part of Toretsk, but this time in the Ukrainian favor. So we see that Ukrainians are not planning to give up. They're showing very fierce resistance because probably this territory changed the color maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times already since the beginning of this year, and obviously we see that this is not the last time when we change the color of some part of Toretsk in someone's favor. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the settlement of Alexandropol in Panteleymanivka. As for now, we still haven't received neither the confirmation of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation nor any geolocation that can confirm additional progress on the ground. I'll remind you that yesterday almost every single pro-Russian resource reported that both villages were captured by the Russians after 48 hours. We still haven't received anything that can confirm this. Yes, we had videos that the Russians entered the northern part, but as for now without additional proofs or additional videos that can adjust the map. So it doesn't mean that the Russians, yes, they captured everything. There are very heavy clashes most likely still. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. After the Ukrainians managed to break through the Russian flank in the vicinity of Salona, we haven't received anything that can confirm whether the Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper or to improve their positions. We know for sure that there are very heavy clashes, but most likely the Russians regrouped introduced additional forces and now try to repel Ukrainian attacks and to force them to fall back. So this is the situation in this area, and I'll remind you that Ukrainians are not giving up an idea to cut these salients along the railways with the purpose to restore supply and support of the city of Pokrovsk, which will allow the Ukrainians and in the end to restore supply and support of the city of Konstantinovka before the beginning of the general battle. Now let's move further. The Russians, after a very long operational pause, resumed their attempts to attack the Ukrainian positions in the area of Razliv and along the Mokry Yala river. We came to this conclusion based on the significant number of videos that was published by the Russians, how they were FPV droning and attacking the Ukrainians in this area, their vehicles, temporary deployment points, their equipment, and many other things. So we see Russian focus, and we see that different sources reported that the Russians probably made attempts to answer the village of Razliv. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions along this river of Mokry Yale. Today we have also lots of videos and updates how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions along the river and along the settlements that are located on different banks of the river of Mokry Yale, which also means that the Russians either are about to begin offensive or already attacking the Ukrainian forces. Furthermore, we got a very important change on the ground in the area of Vilna Polya. We will not also watch this video because we have several episodes with a significant violence there, but we have another proof that confirms Russian progress on the ground, and we see that now the Russians are showing some dynamic in this area. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 24th of March, and the Russians were just on the outskirts of Privilna. Then the Russians entered the southeastern part of Vilna Polya, and today we see that the Russians already control up to 40% of this village, and they're finishing and they're continuing their offensive. As for the Zaporozhye direction, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly, and this was confirmed by both pro-Ukrainian sources and by pro-Russian sources and by neutral sources. So everybody now have no doubts that the Russians are advancing, and we have video that confirm the Russian presence in the territory of Stepova, and all these things tell us just one thing: the Russians managed to create here very powerful foothold, very strong positions they have right now here. They managed to dig in deeper, they managed to prepare their positions, and now they have everything to continue offensive operation. And now the Russians have several options. They can attack further in the northwestern direction towards the settlement by the name of Kamenskaya, or the Russians can begin advancing in the eastern directions towards the settlement of Sherbaki and then towards the village of Novoandreevka, and basically this will mean the beginning of the battle for the city of Orekhov itself. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians bombed and attacked the city of Kryvyi Rog. There were lots of explosions, lots of strikes carried out by different drones, but without violation of a ceasefire on the energy facilities. The Russians attacked the city of Kryvyi Rog, and we have lots of videos that confirm lots of explosions, lots of probably military facilities were destroyed, but none of the energy facilities objects was damaged or attacked by the Russians. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.